What are your views on educational equity?
Well, what is educational equity? So it's always nice to know what it is when I'm talking about.
The notion that school districts are not receiving equal funding per capita per student.
I think that we should equalize, if only to get rid of that phrase. and I seriously think that there's something to be said for getting that issue off the table, because it is a total red herring. But it's going to be, as long as you don't have equalized spending in the schools, that is going to be blamed as one of the reasons for the other things. And so you want to get rid of it. A ton of evidence suggests the amount of money really doesn't make much difference. In Washington, D.C., they have some of the highest expenditures per pupil and some of the lowest scores in the country. In fact, a few years ago, I saw some data on the different states. Of the 5 top states at that time, and it may still be true, in test scores, all were below the national average in expenditure per pupil. Palo Alto High School has 6 tennis courts, some of which I've used, even though I never went to Palo Alto High School. They have a swimming pool, a baseball field, I mean, they're all the works. Now, none of that does anything for education. It's part of their lifestyle, and they want to keep it, fine. But no, I think that issue ought to be off the table.
I was just curious about what you think of Nicholas Lemon's thesis in his new book, The Big Test.
I haven't read the book. What is his thesis?
He questions the new meritocracy that has emerged with the use of he would probably use the scare quotes around the term objective test of academic aptitude.
And compared to what?
Well, that's my question, really.
That's the question the economists always ask. Compared to what? I mean, there's a story that an economist ran into a friend in the street, and his friend said, "How are you? How's your wife?" And he said, "Compared to what?" So, nothing is easier than to prove that something human has imperfections. I'm amazed how many people devote themselves to that task. Yes, well, obviously, people, if you're going to base self-esteem on performance, it cannot be equal, because performance is never going to be equal. And so all you can get in terms of self-esteem is make-believe equality. And, of course, what happens in the schools is they grade, in many cases, not on the objective result, but on how you did relative to what the teacher thinks your ability was. And so you may do a wonderful job, and they say, well, he really was he's a very bright kid. He could have done better than that, and so he gets a B. And the other student, who really did a lousy job, but, it was a big struggle for him even to do that, and so he gets the B+. And, of course, what that means is that the whole grading system just becomes meaningless and confusing. The vision of cosmic justice is very beneficial to the people who hold it, even if it's not beneficial to those whom it's intended to benefit. And I think that's one of the reasons that people are so reluctant to give it up, because they feel wonderful. I'm sure that if we had had the kinds of teachers that we have today, and they had lowered the standards to all of us as we were coming through the school, and we all ended up going out into the world foredoomed to failure, those teachers would have felt wonderful about themselves. Because they say, hey, we're not leaning on these poor kids. We're taking into account that they come from backgrounds that are deprived. I mean, and particularly in education, this is devastating, because it's been shown again and again that in one generation, people can do remarkable things with a decent education. But they're not going to be done as long as third parties think that the purpose of the educational system is to make them feel good about themselves. The people at the bottom are so badly off that they have practically nothing to lose. One of the great disgraces of American education, far more important than the differences in spending, is the way teachers are allocated. That is, typically teachers start out in a good middle-class school, and it turns out they're awful. They'll be moved on to another school, and another. And eventually, they'll start moving them down the social ladder to neighborhoods where the parents are less educated, less affluent, less influential, less able to make trouble. And so they end up teaching those kids for whom education is their only road out of poverty. Well, not only in California, but elsewhere, there's constant shuffling of teachers around, which is done, by the way, simply because of the high cost of firing them. When I wrote a book on education a few years ago, I said it was $50,000 to fire one incompetent teacher. That has now been more than doubled since then. And so they move them around. And in fact, this happens so much that there are even names for this. It's called the Dance of the Lemons. or the turkey trot. There are ability differences, and the educational system, coast to coast, is bitterly set against any form of ability grouping, any form of accommodating to kids who have higher ability. And one of the studies I saw, there was a kid who was in the 4th grade, and he could score above the national average on the College Board SAT in math. And so it was suggested to the principal that this kid should be given something other than 4th grade math. And the principal reacted and he said, no, that would be a violation of social justice. One of the things that protects American education is the fact that American universities are, in fact, leading universities of the world. But that's very misleading, because some of these universities are so good that it's very hard for American college students to get into them. And if you separate out the various fields and you go from the silliest and simplest, such as education, all the way over to the other end of the spectrum, math and engineering and science, you find that the percentage of the PhDs which go to Americans are the highest over here in education, sociology, psychology, etc. And then as you proceed across the spectrum, that percentage declines until finally you get over to mathematics and engineering, where less than half of all the PhDs awarded at American universities go to Americans. And so what we really have are international universities on American soil, supported by American taxpayers, with a very large component of foreign professors and students. And this is what is used to justify the American educational system. But of course, the kids who come here from elsewhere come here with much stronger backgrounds. I was surprised recently to learn that out in Silicon Valley, they're actually recruiting engineers from Russia and India, not because they're necessarily better than American engineers, but because they speak English better.
Assuming that parents play a role and the teachers cannot play the only role in the education of students, how can cosmic justice be created in an atmosphere where parents have not created a conducive learning atmosphere?
I think as they say in the law, you're assuming a fact, not an evidence. I know this is one of the great beliefs in the educational establishments, that all problems in the educational establishment are caused outside the educational establishment. The evidence on that is not compelling. And what is especially not compelling is the determined effort of the NEA and other parts of the educational establishment to prevent this belief from being put to a test. If it is the case that the problems are all outside the system, they're in the parents, then why do they fight bitterly against all forms of choice and vouchers, which would allow you to find out that if we take this same kid with the same parents, watching presumably the same television programs as he always watched and so on, having the same attitudes, and transfer him over into a parochial school or some other kind of school, why don't we find out whether in fact he will not improve at all, because it was never the school's fault in the first place. The bitterness of these battles are hard to exaggerate. In California, they sent so-called truth squads around when people were trying to sign up petitions to get this issue on the ballot. And some of these people were not above using intimidation tactics to prevent people from signing. In New Jersey, one of the big companies, I think it was Pepsi-Cola, was prepared to give scholarships to low-income kids to go from the public schools into the private schools. They were so bitterly opposed to this that suddenly Pepsi-Cola machines in the schools began to be vandalized, and Pepsi had to back off its offer. So if it is in fact the case that all these problems originate outside the school system, why then are they not willing to put that belief to the test? Thank you very much.